Recently, Philip Breedlove, the US general in charge of NATO, talked about 40,000 troops massing on the border. The Germans came out and said, no, our intelligence says 20,000. I mean, there does seem to be some exaggerated and some hyping of the threat on the NATO side.
No, the general is not exaggerating the threat. We have seen a massive build-up of Russian troops along the Ukrainian border.
Okay. Let's go back to our audience. Let's take a question from a lady here. Yes?
Could NATO stop acting as an appeaser to Russia and come up with a clear, definitive strategic plan in order to halt the Russian troops from going further into the territory of Ukraine?
Clearly, there is a difference between being a member of NATO and not being a member of NATO. If you are a member of NATO, you're covered by our Article 5, the collective defense. An attack on one is an attack on all. Ukraine is not a member of NATO, and I don't think any NATO ally has appetite for military confrontation with Russia. But as I indicated, if this continues, if Russia doesn't stop the destabilization of eastern Ukraine, then I think personally that individual NATO allies should consider delivery of defensive weapons to Ukraine so that Ukraine can improve its capability to defend itself. And I base this statement on the fact that
Putin
Ukraine
just send more weapons to his side? Aren't we just ratcheting up?
Of course, there is a clear risk that President Putin would use this as a pretext for further escalation.
Exactly, and yet you still support it.
What is the alternative? The alternative would be that the Russians succeed in Ukraine, and I'm concerned that if they succeed in Ukraine, other countries could be next in line.
Okay, let's go to the gentleman at the back of the hall.
Ali Sajjad Alizada from Afghanistan. Earlier on you said that you'll help civilians under attack, although during your period of time most of the cities in Afghanistan were bombarded. You also talked about Afghanistan having a stronger security force. Forget about Taliban coming back. ISIS have started their activities in 4 different provinces in Afghanistan. How can you be trusted again?
Yeah, but obviously we can't stay in Afghanistan forever. We have never considered ourselves a occupation force. We have helped Afghanistan to build a strong security force itself so that the Afghan security forces can take.
But do you concede that you've said the achievements, which, no one's going to dispute some of the achievements, but would you also concede the harm that you did in Afghanistan as well over those years? I mean, there has been a lot of loss of life, unnecessary loss of life at NATO's hands. Surely you have to concede that.
No, I won't.
So nobody died. Nobody died wrongfully at the hands of NATO. Not a soul.
I will be brief. I will be very clear that from an overall perspective, we did the right thing, and we have helped.
That's a good way of avoiding the specific question I put.
We have helped Afghanistan, and now it's for the Afghans to do their part of the job.
But the Afghans who died at your hands would probably say they weren't helped by NATO. Is the point I'm making.
Overall, we have helped Afghanistan, and Afghanistan today is a better society than when we arrived.
I suspect you agree with me deep down, because you're using the word overall. Okay, let's try and squeeze in some more questions before we finish. Let's go to the gentleman right there at the back.
My question is this. Do you think that there's a role of NATO in a peaceful world?
I would say NATO is the most successful peace movement the world has ever known. But the fact is, thanks to NATO, we have managed to keep peace and stability in Europe since the end of the Second World War.
You just told us that a country has illegally invaded and annexed its neighbour. It's the biggest security threat of all. That happened on your watch, on NATO's watch.
Yeah, and that is the dramatically changed security situation. So from the end of the Second World War until Russia illegally annexed Crimea, we have experienced an unprecedented period of peace and stability in Europe. But Russia's action is a wake-up call. It's a dramatically changed security situation in Europe.
Okay, let's take some more questions. A gentleman here in the second row.
How can you justify NATO's recent recommendation for its members to commit to 2% GDP on defence spending when millions of people living in NATO member states are living with years of...
Unfortunately, security comes at a cost. But insecurity is much more expensive. That's why NATO is a kind of, it's a security insurance. So you can compare to your private insurances. After big storms, many accidents, your insurance premium will exactly what has happened. Our security insurance has become more expensive because of the Russian aggression.
Yeah, but buying insurance for your car is not like buying an aircraft carrier to go to war with.
No,
surely.
It's more expensive, unfortunately.
Lady here in the front row.
How would NATO react if Russia welcomed a pro-Russian regime change in, let's say, Mexico, Canada, and established its military facilities there?
We stick to the principle. Each nation has the right to decide itself whether it will join an alliance or not. And that goes for Georgia, that goes for Ukraine, and it's not for Russia to decide.
What would be the reaction in the US Senate if Mexico was to station some Russian bases and Russian troops?
I don't know, but I think...
What do you think would be the reaction? Do you think it would be okay? Do you think it would be a calm, moderate reaction from Senator John McCain and others?
Actually, I can't answer that question.
You know and I know that the United States would never, in its backyard, what it refers to Latin America as, Russian presence.
I think right now we are speaking pure theory.
Okay, let's take a question from the back.
Hi, you've repeatedly blamed bad outcomes on the wider international community. Do you not think you've been short-sighted when planning NATO operations, not taking into account the lack of support that has often come after you've pulled out of countries?
Yeah, obviously, case by case, we will have to make an assessment whether is possible, obviously also to ensure that it has a clear and sound legal basis, whether there is local and regional support. All these elements are included when a decision
But it wasn't in Libya.
will be taken.
Clearly it wasn't in Libya.
It was in Libya.
So in March 2011, when you committed NATO in Libya, you knew that you would have to walk away and wash your hands of the situation.
A very important part of that decision was the fact that in the region not only supported the operation, but some of them also, 4 countries from the region, actively participated in the operation.
Did you ring round your member states and say, by the way, what happens after we're done? Isn't that your responsibility as the head of NATO to ask that question?
No, it's not our responsibility.
You don't care? You just say, we'll bomb and go.
Let's be clear about this.
Amazing.
That is not a NATO responsibility because NATO is a military organization. Is a civilian task. That's for the UN.
I'm not saying it's not, but you don't even care? What for? You don't even bother to inquire?
Of course.
You're not curious?
Of course we care, but it's not a NATO responsibility. It's rather for the UN.
By definition it is. If you fought the war, then you're responsible for what comes after the war. You can't just walk away.
No, but if that's the case, then you will have to change the whole NATO set up and make NATO a broader civilian organization, and that's not the case.
Or NATO could avoid intervening in the first place.
NATO is a military organization, and what follows is a...
Before we finish, let me ask you this. Given the fact that the US funds, I think, 3/4 of NATO's budget, the US provided most of the manpower for the Afghan operation, and the supreme military commander of NATO is always an American general, what would you say to those who say the NATO Secretary General, people like yourself, are basically a pawn for US interest? You're basically a fig leaf for quote-unquote US imperialism.
That's not an accurate description of what's actually going on in NATO. Of course, the US has quite some weight in our talks when they pay 75% of the bill for our common security. But NATO is an organization that takes decisions by unanimity, by consensus, and all countries play a role in that respect.
You were never pressured or overridden by the Americans during your period?
No, I can assure you I was not. No, not one single member.
Well, on that note, Anders Fogh joining us here on Head to Head. Thank you very much to our panel for coming here and putting the questions. Thanks to our audience here in the Oxford Union, and thanks to you all for watching. Good night.